father went to work there for the UN. And ever since I think I was 7 or 8 years old, I was like this little social justice freak. I basically, we in the streets in Mexico at the time, there were lots of kids my age who were begging. And I didn't understand why. And so we would stop at every red light in the street, every traffic light, and there'd be kids outside begging for food, for money. And I didn't understand why. And I would ask my parents, why are these kids begging? I remember one night my dad was driving in traffic. It was raining hard. You could hardly see outside the car. And we stopped at a traffic light somewhere. And this kid, sort of my age, came to the car. And he put his hands on the windshield in such a way that his face was like an inch away from mine, the other side of the windshield. And he was looking at me. And he somehow wanted me to help him. And I was like 8 years old. And dude, I can't help you. I'm 8 years old. And then my dad just drove away. And I remember his face, and I remember this feeling of impotence, of not knowing how I could actually help out. And that stayed with me. And then my whole childhood, I kept sort of asking and looking and thinking. And the thing is, when you're like 10, I think when I was like 10 or 11, I decided I was going to leave school. I was going to go into the mountains. I was going to start a guerrilla movement. And I was going to just like basically take over Mexico and sort of change everything. And the thing is that when you're 10 and you want to start a revolution, people don't take you seriously, and when you're 10, you're very offended that people don't take you seriously, but it's just the way it is. So I waited, and then we went back to Israel. And then when I was 18, I had to go into the army for 3 years, did that. And then there was a very specific...
Well, hang on.
Yeah, sorry.
I think you're so used to telling your own story. You were in the army in Israel.
Yep.
Can you give us a little bit more about that? Because I think that's totally unusual to most people.
I'm going to, so basically we went back to Israel, which is where I was from. We went back at 15 for high school. And then when you're 18, and certainly when I was younger, all men had to go for 3 years. And all women had to go for 2 years, which is just the way it is. You don't think about it. You don't question it, certainly not then. It's hard to explain to someone who's not from there, but it's as deeply part of your trajectory as, kindergarten, primary school, and high school is here. Like here, you have it embedded in your head that you go to high school and then maybe you go to college, but you absolutely go to high school. So there it's high school, army, and then life. It's just the way it is. And certainly when I was there 30, 40 years ago, no one was, refusing. There'd been a big war in 73 earlier where Egypt and Syria invaded. And so you felt you're protecting your family. So anyway, it was the normal thing to do. And I was sort of brought up in that way. So I went and I served for 3 years. And two, I think, big things happened during those 3 years, to me at least. One, about a year after, a year in, I was in this position where my unit that I had joined, we were on the northern border of the country. It's a border with Syria. And my job was to spend several hours on this watchtower every day alone. And, there was no cell phones. I'm just alone, this watchtower. And I was supposed to be looking at the horizon across, barbed wire, minefields. And in the distance, there are Syrian sort of bases. And I'm supposed to just look across the border for hours and see if anything strange happens. That was the job. And one day I had this thought that sort of made me laugh out loud. I remember I was alone in this tower and suddenly I burst out laughing. And I laughed because, a little background here is that a few months earlier, as I was getting to know the guys in my own unit, I realized that some of them are, great guys that I would just like trust with my life. And we've all met people like that in our life. You run into someone like, oh my God, this person is like my kind of person. Mm. And other guys, I was like, eh. And the way I thought about it in my head was that some of these guys would, and I knew it, they would give me their last pair of dry socks if I ever needed them. Some of them might steal mine if they needed them. And that's how I thought about them. And I had this like image in my head. And so one day I was up on the tower, I was looking through the telescope, and I don't know if the Syrian soldiers in the distance in this valley, they had a few hours off and they were playing soccer. And I could see them playing. I could even hear some laughter coming up sort of across the mountain. And there was something in that moment that completely humanized them in my eyes. And this is, again, hard to explain if you haven't been there, although right now we're all so polarized that maybe this makes more sense. When you grow up in a conflict zone or in a polarized society, it's very natural to dehumanize the other side. They're not exactly human. If you saw them as human as you are, it'd be very hard to fight them. You can fight them because they're not exactly human. And so I'm seeing them playing, they become completely humanized in my eyes. And suddenly I have this flash and I think, wait a second. If I want to join them now, there would also be some guys there that might share their socks with me and some others that wouldn't. There might also be the same kind of good guys and not that I have in my unit. And in that sense, this whole fence between us is running the wrong way. What if all the good guys got on one side and all the other ones on the other? I mean, I have never met those guys on the other side, those Syrians. I don't want to fight them. I don't want to shoot any of them. There's some guys on my unit who, if I had to shoot somebody, I wouldn't mind. I mean, I've actually met them. So I laughed out loud. And of course, afterwards I realized, and I know, decades later, that life is more complicated. And then in fact, it's not really about good people and bad people. There's a constant struggle between good and bad within each of us. And yet, I still think that all over the world, there are people who share some very, very basic values around love and freedom and dignity and solidarity and joy. And if those people could somehow work together, the world would be a better place.